Erev Tov, we are here at Kehilat Shiftei Yisrael and Ranana on Zoom, and we are going to start our preparation for Shemitah Tafshin Pei-Bet. So we're not quite there yet, but Shachayanu v'Kimanu v'Yigenu Lazman Hazeh. This is very exciting. It's a big deal. Only happens every 7th year. I'm curious. Raise your hands if this is the first time you're going to experience Bezrat Hashem Shemitah in Israel. Raise your hand. Let me see those hands. Virtual hands, actual hands. Raise your hand if this is the first time. Neil, we got a yes from Neil. Okay. Anyone else? Is anyone else a first-time Shemitah person here? Anyone else? Steve Adler, this is first for you, huh? Karen, not first for you. Melchior is not first for you. Louise, first for you as well. Okay, so we have a number of people who are experiencing Shemitah for the first time. And so this was exciting and challenging. As we'll see, Shemitah poses some challenges, but also some very, very special spiritual opportunities. And we're going to start our study now. This is recorded so that if you miss something, or if you don't understand something, or if other people want to listen, they will be able to join us as well. So I'm going to share the screen, and I've created a PowerPoint presentation for this evening. And so we're going to start with what we call Shemitah in the Garden, okay? Part 1, Shemitah Tafshin Pei-Bet, and here you have a beautiful picture of Eretz Yisrael. Right here. Let me just adjust my screen here for a second. Okay, so first of all, let's talk about some resources that I want you to make use of when, for this coming year. There are many books of halacha about Shemitah, okay? The first and most basic one is looking at the Torah sources, which we will look at. Secondly, you have the Mishnayot, Masechet Shvi'it, which is very technical, by the way. There is no Talmud Bavli on Shemitah, but there is a Talmud Yerushalmi. So that's another thing that you may want to consider studying. But in terms of practical halachic guides, we have number 1, Pinei Halacha, Rav Eliezer Melamed. This is an excellent sefer. It's only in Hebrew, gives you practical halacha, and then in the footnotes, you have more extended analysis. Option number 2 is to learn about a website called Torahland. This is a Machon HaTorah VeHa'aretz. I'm just going to click on this link here so you can see what this is. This is a phenomenal, phenomenal website. Contemporary Halacha, the Institute for Torah in the Land of Israel. And here you could find many articles going down on the left side here. Shemitah, caring for home gardens, buying flowers and planters, Shemitah sanctity and biur times for fruits. There are so many articles here, and it's not just in terms of Shemitah. If you go to, just look at our services, I just want you to understand how great of a website this is. You have Ask the Rabbi questions. You have a fund that you could join for Trumot Umasrot. You have a mobile learning center. You have, agricultural research, conferences and study days. Analyze your master, money manager. There's an English department. This is Torah VeHa'aretz Institute. So many great things here. But if we just go for a second to the halachic guides, again, you have things about all different topics, Kilaim and Chala and Trumot Umasrot and Orla. And one particular piece here is also about Shemitah, as I showed you. Here we go, Hilchot Shemitah, and this is just a great resource for you. Okay, so this is the second thing that you may want to consider looking at. Okay, we now continue to the third thing, is Rav Yosef Tzvi Rimon Sefer. Sorry, let me just go back here, which is Shemitah Halacha Mi Mekorah. You can see a picture here on the right. And this is in English and in Hebrew. This is a much more in-depth analysis of the laws of Shemitah, so you could definitely recommend looking at it. We have here a version in the library, and I also have one in Hebrew. And then just something fun, Torah Live is an interesting website that has videos, interactive videos for your children and for you, in fact. So if you go to Torah Live, you could see they have some stuff about the laws of the mitzvot hatfliot ba'aretz, the mitzvot that are reliant, dependent on being in Eretz Yisrael. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next slide. Let's start with sources in the Torah for Shemitah. There are 3 primary sources. Number 1 is Vayikra Perek Kafeh. This is Parashat Behar. Number 2, as we'll see, will be let's continue, Shemot Perek Kaf Gimel. And then the third will be Dvarim Perek Tet Vav. Let's start first with Vayikra Perek Kafei, Vayidaber Hashem El Moshe Behar Sinai Lemor. Hashem says to Moshe on Har Sinai, what does he teach him about? Daber al bnei Yisrael v'amar alehem, tell the Jewish people, Ki tavo el aretz, when you enter the land. Shemitah is a mitzvah that only applies to people who are living in Eretz Yisrael. Does not apply to Chutz La'aretz. There's some interesting discussions about lands surrounding Eretz Yisrael, Syria, for example, and areas even south by Eilat. Is Eilat fully encompassed within Eretz Yisrael, the Gvulot of Eretz Yisrael? It's a question. But this is a mitzvah in particular for those who live in Eretz Yisrael. So this is a big zechut for us. And there are some discussions about whether you could bring produce from Eretz Yisrael to Chutz La'aretz in the year of Shemitah. Generally, we don't do it. Okay, so this is a mitzvah that Hashem gives us to us once we enter the land. The land shall observe a Shabbat. Just like we have Shabbat every 7 days, the land has a Shabbat every 7 years. A Shabbat la Hashem. What does this year of Shemitah, we haven't seen the word Shemitah, by the way. All we've seen is the notion of Shabbat, of rest. That's a term, a phrase, Shemitah, that we'll see in Parashat Re'eh. For 6 years, you should plant your fields. And you should prune your vineyards. And you should gather in your produce. Okay, I'm just seeing something in the chat. I'm just going to check on it. Okay, I'm going to address questions in another few minutes. Well, everyone can I'll gather all the questions together. Okay, that's what you're going to do for 6 years. And then in the 7th year, Shabbat Shabbaton Yel Aretz. The 7th year will be a year of full, total rest. Shabbat la Hashem. Sadacha lo tizra. You will not feed your field. V'charmacha lo tizmor. And you will not prune your vineyards. Okay, we go on. Skip that for a second. We go on. Eitz safiach kitzercha lo tiksor. Another prohibition. You may not harvest that which grows in your fields. That in vain is iracha lo titzor, and you shall not gather the grapes that grow on your vines. Shenat Shabbaton Yel Aretz. It should be a year of rest for the land. Now, just pointing out here in Pasuk Gimel and in Pasuk Gimel, okay, and Daled, we have the prohibition surrounding harvesting. Planting, seeding, like lo tizra, and pruning, okay? Those have to do with the growth process, okay? Increasing growth, stimulating growth, okay? Whereas the final pasuk here in Pasuk Hey has to do with gathering in things once they grow. Lo tiksor, lo tivtzor. Again, we go to Pasuk Vav, v'haita Shabbat ha'aretz lachem le'ochla, lecha u'lavdacha ve'la'amatecha. So this will be a year of rest. And who will the food be available for? It will be for you to eat, for your servant, your maidservant, your workers, and those who laborers who live with you. Also for the animals, as we'll see in just a second, in Parashat Mishpatim, all the produce that does grow in the 7th year becomes hefker. It is ownerless. Anybody can come and take it. It doesn't belong to us anymore. Now, just one thing to point out. You'll notice that we have a connection here between Shemitah and Har Sinai. So there's a famous Rashi, which is based on the Midrash. Rashi asks, Ma inyan Shemitah eitzel Har Sinai. And for those of you who are studying in Ulpan, this is even a phrase that appears in your standard Hebrew dictionary. Ma inyan Shemitah eitzel Har Sinai. And it's a colloquial, it's a phrase we use today. And this is equivalent to what they say. What does that have to do with the price of tea in China? Okay, that's how we say it. We say it in a biblical way. Ma'inyan Shemitah eitzel Har Sinai. And there are all these different explanations of what's the connection specifically between Shemitah and Kabbalat Torah Har Sinai. We're not going to get into that right now. Okay, that's the first source. Source number 2 is Shmot Perek Kaf Gimel. And what does it say there? V'sheish shanim tizra et artzecha. For 6 years you should seed your plant in your land, and gather your food. And in the 7th year, and this is now the provenance of this phrase Shemitah, in the 7th year you should let it rest. You should let it become unetashta, leave it, let it lay fallow. Ve'achlu evyonei amecha, and even the poor people of the land can eat from the produce. V'yitram tochal chayat aseh, and that which is extra, the animals will eat. Kain ta'aseh lecharmecha ulezeitacha, you'll do this to your vineyard, and now lezeitacha, also to your olive groves. Okay, that's added in. We only saw something about vineyards, now we're seeing something about olive groves as well. So this is the provenance of this phrase, tish metena, of you're leaving it. And what this means is that you're mafkir your produce. It belongs to everyone, okay? It's ownerless. It doesn't belong to you, even if it's growing in your fields. And we'll talk about, are you allowed to go into someone's field and just take any fruits? That's an interesting question, okay? So we'll talk about that. Third source. Third source brings us to a second element of Shemitah, and that is Shmitat Ksafim. We've been talking about Shmitat Karkaot, which is the idea that everything becomes ownerless in your fields. But this notion also applies with regards to money, to debt, to loans that you make. Shmitat Ksafim, this is mentioned explicitly in Parshat Re'eh. At the end of a 6-year cycle, you should do Shemitah, okay? But in this case, it's an economic, financial. Taseh Shemitah, which means that just like you let your oranges and your apples lay fallow and anyone can take them, so you erase your loans, the loans that you owe to people. This is how it works. Every person who lent money, every creditor, they cancel the loan. You may not demand the loan back. You can give a loan for 10,000 shekel in the 5th year of the Shemitah cycle, and then the 7th year comes, it's erased. They don't owe you the money anymore. Because this is a year that's been declared as Shemitah to Hashem. Okay, we're going to talk about Shemitah Ksafim in more detail at a later point, Be'ezrat Hashem. Now, so altogether, and after this, I'm going to take a few questions. We have a list of the mitzvot of Shemitah. This comes from the Rambam's, the Hakdamah of the Rambam to Hilchot Shemitah V'Yovel. The Rambam gathers together thematically the laws related to Shemitah, which is the 7-year cycle that we count up. And this all leads to Shemitah Yovel, which is the 50th year, the Jubilee year. And as we'll see there, these two concepts are integrally connected, which is why the Rambam writes about them very thematically in the same set of halachot. So mitzvah, just do it. There are 9 mitzvot related to Shemitah, okay? Number 1, this is a mitzvah to say, Shatishbot ha'aretz b'shvi'it mi melachta. The land should rest from work. Now this is an interesting phrase here. Shatishbot ha'aretz. Does the land need a rest, or do I need a rest from working the land? What is it, the land or me? Okay, mitzvah number 2, Shelo ya'avod avodat ha'aretz b'shana zo. Don't work the land. Don't develop the land. Now, the Rambam, it's very interesting, instead of using the phrase lo tizra, okay, he says it's avodat ha'aretz generally, okay, it's like a broader category. Same thing he says about shelo ya'avod avodat ha'ilan, don't do work of the ilan. And this is represented by lo tivtzor, don't prune the trees. But in general, it's more klali, it's more expansive to include any work on a tree. Mitzvah dalet, the 4th mitzvah, shelo yiktzor hasfiach kederach hakotrim, don't harvest the field the way that harvesters normally harvest. We will see that, let's say you have a clementine tree, clementina. You are allowed to remove some of the fruit and eat it, but you can't do it in an industrial manner. We'll talk about this. Also, you should not gather the grapes from a vineyard in the way that people who own vineyards generally do. Those are the first 5 mitzvot related to Shmitat Karkaot, to the Shemitah of the land. And now what about Shemitah by the financial, economic Shemitah? Shmitat Ksafim. Sheishamet ma shetotzi haaretz. Okay, so first of all, this really actually should be connected to the first 5, but everything that does grow from the land, we lay fallow. It becomes ownerless. It's hefker. Mitzvah number 7, sheishamet kol halva'ato. You cancel all debts, all credit. Don't demand money from the borrower. This is interesting. You also cannot not give a loan. You can't say, well, it's the 6th year. If I give a loan for 1 million shekel, I'm not getting it back next year, so I'm not going to give the loan. You still have to give the loan. And we'll see that this is because of this complicated situation. Hillel is going to institute something called a prosbul, which is a loophole around Shemitah Ksafim, which we will talk about Bezrat Hashem at a later point in time. Now we talk about the Ta'amei HaMitzvot. Okay, I'm going to pause for a second and take up to 2 questions. Okay, so I'm stopping the share. Okay, who has any specific questions? I see Karen, you have a question. Yes.
Yes, Rabbi, the Zoom kicked out twice, and we lost you after item Aleph on Rambam's list.
Did the Zoom really? Okay. I still have.
It disconnected twice.
Did somebody else have that experience, or is that just you? Yeah.
I just came on now. I couldn't get on before.
Okay. So did anyone else, Pinchas and Badia, were you able to hear everything I just said? Yeah. Okay. So Karen, it may be your device. I didn't see anything.
Oh dear.
Going in and out, but it is. It will be on the recording. Okay. Evelyn, also, I'm seeing a thumbs up. Thumbs up because Argentina also won the Copa World Cup final. Okay. So Messi redeemed himself. Maybe he really is the Mashiach, Evelyn. Okay. It remains to be determined, but he's getting old. Okay, let's move on. Okay, Ta'amei HaMitzvot. What's the rationale behind all these mitzvot? We want to understand the meaning behind this, and when we understand the meaning, it gives us it makes it more special and inspirational for us. So we have a number of different reasons given for why we keep Shemitah. Okay. And what's very fascinating about this is that the explanations encompass almost every area, human relationships. It relates to our relationship with God vertically, horizontally with others. It relates to it's about our relationship to the land. It's many different things. So Shemitah is an all-encompassing mitzvah. So first, the Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim Chelek Gimel Perek Lametet. ואומנם כל המצוות אשר ספרונם בהלכות שמיטה ויובל מהם לחמלה על בני אדם והרחבה לבני אדם כולם. The Rambam sees an element of social justice in Shemitah, because instead of you taking the produce for yourself, it's now hefker, and it belongs to anybody who wants to have it. So poor people can come and take from your orchards, and so there's social justice, there's equivalence. Yeah, we are narrowing the economic disparity that might exist in societies. In Israel, actually, the economic disparity between the haves and the have-nots is very wide, and it's getting wider and wider. And it's something that we need to try to narrow. And Shemitah is about narrowing that. I'll just say generally, there's a very interesting discussion about Jewish economic theory. Does Judaism espouse a capitalistic model or a socialist model? So there are those who suggest that, well, it's neither here nor there, but Shemitah to some degree is a tikkun, is a corrective for a more capitalist model. So during Shemitah and Yovel, where debts are canceled and the fruit, the produce of the 7th year belongs to everyone. So it means that I can't make more money if I already have money. And it means that those who don't have will have more. Okay, so that's one explanation of the Rambam. A second explanation is that v'shetosif aretz tevuata v'titchazek be'emda shmuta. That Rambam actually says the value of Shemitah is that it will improve the quality of the land. The land needs to rest. It needs to regain and resuscitate itself and regain its nutrients. And this happens in the Shemitah year by taking a year off from planting. Those are two explanations. The Sefer HaChinuch says as follows: Mishorshei HaMitzvah likboa b'libenu l'tzayer tziyur chazak, to strengthen our emunah b'machshavtenu inyan chidush ha'olam, the notion that God created the world. Ki sheshit yamim asa Hashem et hashmayim v'et haaretz v'yom hashvi'i shelo bara davar echtiv menucha l'atzmo. So this is to some degree they're like concentric circles of 7. We have Shabbat during the week, and we have 7 years Shemitah cycle. And this is about, again, coming back to this idea that God created the world and we rest in the 7th year, and that means that God is the ultimate creator. Another value to the Shemitah year, go to the last paragraph here. This teaches us to be more generous, more charitable. Okay, that's really a third explanation. But what he's saying here is that a person is giving without any expectation of receiving. Okay, so there's no reciprocation here. You're giving up, but you're not gaining, and that's a good thing. That teaches us to be more charitable and more generous. A third explanation, he says, ועוד יש תועלת, אחר נמצא בזה אדם שיוסיף אדם ביטחון בשם ברוך הוא. כי כל המוצא עם לבבו לתת ולהפקיר לעולם כל גדולי קרקעותיו ונחל אבותיו והגדלים בכל שנה ושנת. To give up all your produce in 1 year, it takes a lot of bitachon and emunah Hashem. How am I going to put food on the plate, on the table? How am I going to make parnasah for this year? So you have to have bitachon to keep Schnatashmita. Okay, next page. Okay, a few more explanations. Okay, which have to do with we are not in control, and I really like this picture. Fortunately, we are not in control. Sometimes there's something very, how shall we say, calming, knowing that we are not in control. Hakadosh Baruch Hu is in control, and we need to do our hishtadlut. We have to do the best that we can, but ultimately things are in Hashem's hands. And Shnatashmita reminds us that we are not in control. In what way does it teach us this? Let's look at the Midrash Tanchuma Parshat Vayikra Siman Aleph. Zeh she'amar katuv baruch hu Hashem malachav giborei koach oseh dvaro. Hashem should bless his angels. His angels should be blessed. Giborei koach, the powerful ones. Oseh dvaro, the ones who fulfill his word. What is this referring to? Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha Amar. Elu shomrei shvi'it. These are the people who keep shvi'it. What do we learn from the source? It's not so easy to keep Shnatashmita. Maybe not everybody kept Shemitah. But those who keep it are giborei koach. They're warriors. They're courageous. V'lama nikru giborei koach. Why are they called this? Kevan sheroes sadeu muvkeret. You see someone coming to your land and taking the fruit off the tree. V'ilanotav muvkarin. V'hasayagin mufratzin. V're'eh perotav me'achalin. You see people having a picnic on your yard, just taking anything they want. And he say, get off my yard. That's mine. It belongs to me. And you hold back, you restrain yourself, and you don't say anything. This is a gibor, a person who gives up. So we see the tension. We saw this notion of developing generosity, but not everyone feels so generous all the time. So here we have the struggle to not say anything when someone else is taking from your field. Again, we are not in control. Rav Hirsch also speaks about this in his commentary to the Torah. Vayikra Perek Kafei Pasuk Zayin. Adam Yisrael Zocher she'admato knuya laHashem. The ultimate purpose of Shemitah is to recognize that the land belongs to Hashem. V'ilu hu rak ger v'toshav im Hashem, and we're just strangers in the land. We are just resident aliens. Be'ota sha'a ein hu ovedet admato v'lo osefet tfuatak telavtiach et kiyumo. וכשהוא שובת מזרעה ומזמירה, וכשאינו קוצר את הפרי שגדל מעליו כדי להביאו לביתו, שוב אין אדמתו מספקת מזונו באותה שנה, ונמצא שחותמת של ההפקר תפועה באדמת כל הארצל. So what's the idea here? The idea here is by not working the land, by not developing it, we let go. We recognize the land does not belong to us, and this connects to one of the psukim in Parashat Bahar, Ki li kol ha'aretz. Hashem says the land ultimately is mine. It's mine. And this is such an important lesson. We live in a world filled with materialism and possessions, and we're always ordering things and buying new things and new products and new this, and everything is so commercialized. And Shemitah is a year to sit back and say, that doesn't belong to me. I'm going to let go. I'm going to give up what I possess. And there's something very powerful about that experience. Okay, there are all these people, minimalism is like the new big thing, get rid of stuff, so Shemitah, to some degree, is about that. And I'll just mention Ibn Ezra, who says in his commentary to the Torah, Shabbat LaHashem means that you're supposed to take a year off and study Torah. This is the notion of a sabbatical, of a Shabbaton. So you have to sit in the Beit Midrash. If you're not working in the field, you're not sitting on Netflix all day. Okay, you're working in the field. You're sitting in the Beit Midrash and studying Torah. Okay, now we get into a little bit more nitty-gritty. Okay, do we need to keep Shemitah today? So this is a very important question. And the truth is that there is a machloket between the Rishonim. There's the Ramban, the Baal HaMaor, and the Ravid, and then the majority of Rishonim. The Ramban suggests that Shemitah, the laws of Shemitah, even though they're mentioned in the Torah explicitly, this is only as the force of midrabanan. This is a commandment of the rabbis, but not from the Torah. The Baal HaMaor and the Ravid go even further. They say Shemitah is midat chasidut. It's like something that pious people keep. That's a minority opinion. What do the majority of Rishonim, of medieval scholars, say, including the Rambam, for example, according to most opinions? Shemitah is only, sorry, you know what? I made a mistake here. The Ramban says Shemitah is midoraita. The majority of Rishonim say that Shemitah is only observed today midirabanan. Okay, I need to fix this. Let me just let me do it right now so that people don't get confused. Is midoraita is midoraita. There we go. Okay. Now we can go back to presenting. Yafe. Majority of Rishonim, Shemitah is only observed today midirabanan. This has important halachic implications. It means that there are going to be certain circumstances where we are willing to be lenient because we're talking about a rabbinic law. The major repercussion is that there's going to be something called heter mechira. Heter mechira means essentially that we're going to sell our land to many people, many farmers sell their land to non-Jews and then work the land. Just like you sell your chametz on Pesach. By selling the land to non-Jews, it removes the sanctity of the produce of Shemitah. Something that grows in Eretz Yisrael during the Shemitah year has what's called Kedushat Shvi'it. It's holy. It's literally holy. And there's a discussion. Some suggest that the Ramban, okay, the Megillat Esther, whose glosses to the Ramban's glosses to the Sefer HaMitzvot of the Rambam, says there's a mitzvah to eat Kedushat Shvi'it. We want to gobble up and eat as much of the produce of the seventh year as we can. So when something grows in Eretz Yisrael, if something grows in your garden, it has Kedushat Shvi'it. If you sell it through Heter Mechira, it means that it does not have Kedushat Shvi'it. It means that it does not have Kedushat Shvi'it. And therefore, when something has Kedushat Shvi'it, you have to dispose of it in a certain way. You have to fully consume it. You can't just throw it out. You can't mistreat it. There are all these halachot which we're going to talk about. But if Shemitah is midrabanan, that's what enables you to rely on heter mechira. We'll get there, but I'm just foreshadowing a big and important topic. Okay, why is Shemitah midrabanan? Why? Okay, so here we have some sources which will give us. So the answer is that the truth is it's complicated, but the general answer is that Shemitah is based on Yovel. Let's look at the Talmud Yerushalmi Masechet Shvi'it Perek Yud Halachad Bet. So the Yerushalmi makes a connection between Shemitah and Yovel. Shemitah and Yovel. Yovel again is a 50-year cycle. Shemitah is the 7-year cycle, 7 years, 7 cycles. Zeh dvar hashmitah shamot. Zeh dvar hashmitah shamot. This comes up in Parashat A. Rebbe says, Shnei shmitin haladu. These two notions of laying things fallow, Shemitah and Yovel, Bisha shehayovel noheg Shemitah noheg. When Yovel exists, min haTorah, Shemitah is enforced, min haTorah. When Yovel is not enforced, Shemitah is not enforced. Now, nowadays, do we keep the Jubilee year? The answer is no. Why do we not keep the Shnatah Yovel? And Shnatah Yovel, by the way, the slaves go free, you return certain ancestral lands, debts are also canceled, okay? There are many of these things also take place in the 50th year. We also blow the shofar, right? Vavarta shofar Trua Ba'aretz, you blow the shofar on Yom Kippur, which is the minhag. Why do we blow the shofar on Yom Kippur now? It's to remember what we used to do when there was Yovel every 50 years. Why is Yovel only midrab? Why do we not keep Yovel today? The answer is, it's based on a pasuk in Vayikra Perek Kafei, and it says there, "V'kidashtem eit shnata chamishim shana." You're supposed to, this is the bottom source, you're supposed to sanctify the 50th year. Ukratem derur ba'aretz l'chol yoshveha, and you call for freedom throughout the land. Now it says l'chol yoshveha, to all of its inhabitants. Now, what does this notion of all inhabitants mean? So all of the inhabitants means that all the Jews of the world need to be living in Eretz Yisrael in order to have Yovel. Now, we don't have all the Jews in the world living in Eretz Yisrael. And the truth is that the way we darshan this is that you don't need all means rov, ruba kikulo. Okay, sometimes in halacha you have a certain majority. It's like is equivalent to the whole thing. So ruba kikulo means that if the majority of Jews were living in Eretz Yisrael, then we would keep Yovel, and then because we're keeping Yovel, we would also keep Shemitah as well. Okay, So, the other thing, by the way, not only do you need majority of the Jews living in Eretz Yisrael, but the Gemara in Erech and Daf Lamed Bet Amud Bet also teaches us you have to have the majority of Jews here and leaving according to where their Shvatim are. If you're from Shevet Zvulun, you live up north. Shevet Dan, you're in the Golan. Shevet Yehuda, you're in Yehuda. Menashe, you're in the Shomron. You understand? You have to be in your ancestral land. So these are two criteria which are certainly unfulfilled in our day and age, which is the main reasons why we say that Shemitah today is midrabanan. Again, because Yovel doesn't apply today, and Shemitah is based on Yovel, and therefore Shemitah is only midrabanan. Will this change at some point? Well, will this ever change? So I have a map here. This is data from 1997. Okay, where are Jews living throughout the world? So if you look at this map, this statistic, there are 15.8 million Jews in the world. Okay, 6 million living in New York, not New York, in America. Okay, 2.9 million in Europe, and 4.6 million in Israel, which according to this map, and this is again from 25 years ago, only 29% of Jews live in Eretz Yisrael. Okay, maybe it's more at this point in time. I think it is more. We're not quite there at 50%, but there are those poskim who say that once we get to 50% Jews in Eretz Yisrael, Yovel will be enforced, and Shemitah will be a law that we need to follow min ha-Torah, by Torah force, and not just from a rabbinic standpoint. Okay, Yafeh. I'm going to pause for a second and take questions. Does anybody have any questions at this point in time? One or two questions, comments, thoughts, anybody? Okay, good. Let's move on to the next piece. Now we're going to move into is talking about Shemitah in the garden. Okay, here we have a beautiful garden. Look how beautiful this garden is. Now what we're going to focus on is Shemitah in the garden. Later on, we're going to move on to Shemitah in the mitbach, in the kitchen. Okay, those are sort of the two areas that are relevant to us. Okay, and when I mean the mitbach, by extension, it will include the supermarket, things that you're eating, that you're consuming. If you're a farmer, so then in the field, that's a whole other issue. But there's overlap between what happens in the garden and what happens in the field. So I'm just seeing something in the chat here. Yes, we will make the source sheets available to everyone after this year. Okay, there are 4 primary prohibitions which we saw related to the garden itself: no planting, no pruning, no harvesting, and no gathering. Okay, those are the 4. And over the next 3 weeks, Bezrat Hashem, we're going to break this down into 3 different parts. Number 1 is to do with planting, seeding, what we call the growth stage. Okay, planting and pruning. Mitzvot number 1 and 2. Then the next week, we'll do maintenance, fertilizing, weeding, watering, nutrition, cutting growth back, bug control, all those things. And those really have to do with mitzvot midrabanan. And then in the 3rd week, we'll talk about gathering the fruit, which has to do with Kedushat Shvit, and that has to do with harvesting and gathering mitzvot 3 and 4 based on this list. Okay, so that's a general roadmap for where we're going here. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So let's start with Zri'ah, seeding. Okay, and I intentionally defined Zri'ah as seeding because one of the questions that we have is, does this apply to planting trees? Zri'ah is seeds. If I put in kitniot, if I plant legumes, or if I plant wheat, those are seeds. But what if I plant trees? So a number of questions that I want to raise here with regards to seeding. Number 1, let's say I don't work the field. Let's say I don't plant, but can I have a non-Jew work the field during Schnatashmita? We're not talking about selling your field like Heter Mechira. I'm talking about I own my garden. I just bring a non-Jewish worker to work in my garden. Okay, that's number 1. Number 2, what if I live in a building with a shared garden and some people do not keep Shemitah? What are we going to do about that? And I'm paying my Vad Habayit, and some of that money is going to gardening. Does that mean that I am, misayeh? Am I am I actively involved in violating Shemitah? Number 3, are we responsible for what happens in the city of Ra'anana? Are they going to be planting here in Ra'anana? I mean, do we need to protest the mayor if they're going to be doing work in Ra'anana and not following all the halachot of Shemitah? Number 4, does the prohibition of seeding include planting trees as well? Okay, plants, and this could be shrubs or trees. Number 5, does this include non-fruit trees, what are called the ilanei srak? We've been talking about fruit, okay? Kedushat shvi'it. What if I have a tree? I want to plant a cedar tree in Eitz Erez. What if I want to plant an oak tree? I don't know if we have oak trees here in Israel. Do we have oak trees here in Israel? We don't have oak trees in Israel. But I love oak trees. But okay, beseder.
Yes, we have oak trees here in Israel, but they're not the same oak trees that you have in North America.
Beseder. But we live in, the truth is I'm realizing we live in like a tropical hothouse here in Ranana. It's unbelievable, the trees that we have, the variety, the diversity that we have here in Ranana, and the speed with which things grow. Number 6, if seeding is done via machine or indirectly, is that part of the prohibition? Let's say I use a tractor. Let's say I have a machine that does all the work. Okay, does that apply as well? Number 7, what about flower pots on my porch or garden? That's really important because some people have a garden, some people do not have a garden. But many people have flower pots on their merpeset, in their home, in their kitchen, on their windowsills, on their roofs. This is a very important question. We're gonna start that tonight, and Bezrat Hashem continue that tomorrow, next time. And number 8, when is the last time I can plant in my garden? When does Schnatashmita start? And as we're going to see, that's a trick question because it starts at one point, but things are prohibited even earlier. Okay, so let's start answering these questions. These questions will relate to a number of the melachot, a number of the prohibitions, but we're starting off with a little bit of a focus on Zriya. So first of all, I want to bring to your attention the idea that there is a positive commandment. Aside for the negative commandments that we just spoke about, there's a positive commandment, and this is Vishavta Haaretz, which is that the land should rest. Now, there's a discussion about how to define this mitzvah taseh. Okay, and I have a picture here of Rav Kook. Rav Kook was very involved in the discussions around Shemitah. He moves to Yafo to become the chief rabbi of Yafo in, I think it's 1905, if I'm not mistaken, 1903. But then he becomes the chief rabbi in 1921, and he's dealing with Shemitah as the Yishuv is growing and growing here in Eretz Yisrael. So he writes a whole sefer called Vishavta Haaretz, which we have here in the Shiftei Library. And at the end of that book, he has something called the Kuntras Ha'acharam. And he addresses this question of what is the meaning of this mitzvah to say. And he comes to, I'm sharing this with you because the truth is, he doesn't agree with the notion that he comes up with here, but it is a fascinating idea, which I just want to share with you. The Shona Rambam in Minyan HaMitzvot. The Rambam's language in Minyan HaMitzvot, in the counting of mitzvot, is Aleph, Shetishbo ta'aretz b'shvi'it mi'melachta. And I pointed that out earlier, that the land should rest from its work. Now, when we read the Rambam very carefully. Every single word counts. The Rambam writes in a letter that it took him 10 years, day and night, to write his codification of Jewish law, the Mishneh Torah. Every word counts. The Rambam is adopting phrases from all over Shas when he writes his Mishneh Torah. So what does it mean? This is a mitzvah that devolves upon, that falls upon the land. And this follows the opinion of the Maharshal and the Minchat Chinuch, two commentators. It means if the land needs to rest, it means that even a non-Jew may not work the land. If the prohibition is about a Jew not working, fine. The individual, fine. But here it's about, then that would only apply to Jews. Only Jews are commanded in this mitzvah. But if it's about the land needs to rest, is it that I can't work the land or the land needs to rest? Then even a non-Jew would not be able to work the land. Halacha l'ma'aseh, Rav Kook paskins that a non-Jew can work the land. But here he's just developing this notion of the Rambam. Okay, and he says, "Ulefiza lo rak sheyesh yisur Torah im Yisrael oset avodat haaretz al yedei polim nochrim." If the land needs to rest, it means that not only are you not allowed to have, you can't have non-Jews work the land. Ela shegam asur laniach nochrim la'avod. Shaharei bazeh shem ovdim vehem mevatlim otanu mitzvah aseh d'shvitat haaretz. Not only are non-Jews not allowed to work our land, they can't even work their land. because the land needs to rest. We need to ensure that everybody is resting from work. שמצוות הסייד ושבתה הארץ, אם אמר שהיא בפני עצמה, אינה שייכה דווקא על בעל השדה, אלא היא מצווה כללית לכל ישראל. And if you take this further, it means that ושבתה הארץ is a collective mitzvah for all of Am Yisrael, that we all need to ensure that the land is resting in the seventh year. Almost like the land has like a personality, a character. And we need to make sure that the land rests. Okay? לפי זה כל מי שעובר עבירה ועושה עבודת הארץ בשביעית, לא רק שהוא בעצמו עובר על עשה ולא תעשה, אלא שהוא מכשיל בזה את כל ישראל, שהכל מבטלים על ידו את מצוות בשבת הארץ. There's this collegiality, this responsibility that we have to make sure that every Jew is resting in the seventh year. Again, this is a theoretical construct, but I'm just sharing it with you. In the end, we paskin that a non-Jew can work the land. Okay, it's not recommended, but it's permitted. Meikar hadin. Okay, but let's move on to this. So this is that topic. If you saw the first question, what if non-Jews work the land instead of Jews? What if they plant? Meikar hadin, we paskin they can. Okay, let's go to when you live in a shared garden. Okay. Now this is very practical halacha l'maaseh. Let's say you rent out your house or your garden apartment to another Jew. Okay, you've invested in real estate and you're renting out your place to another person. So we have a tshuva here by Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, who in Minchat Shlomo, in Siman Nun Aleph, he addresses many questions related to Shemitah. And he asks the following question. Do I need to prevent a renter from working in my garden in the seventh year? This demands further analysis. The Tosfot follows based in Masachet Avodah Zarah. Okay. Daf Ted Vav Amud Aleph. Shehaba'alim ovrim ba'asei bazeh shehasocher zorea v'choresh b'sadeu b'shvi'it. Now, this essentially is a practical ramification of what we saw earlier in Rav Kook, that you need to prevent everybody from working, even if you yourself are not deriving benefit from it, okay, because you've rented out the apartment and someone else, your land cannot be worked on. You need to make sure the land is not worked, in this case, by someone who's renting your land. He says, I don't understand. You should probably have to do? You probably have to mafkir your land. You have to say, this land doesn't belong to me. I've rented out my garden. I've rented out my house, but it doesn't belong to me. I'm relinquishing my own ownership in this land, in much the same way that we relinquish the ownership of an animal that we've rented to a non-Jew, and they might use that animal on Shabbat, and our animals need to rest on Shabbat, and so too the land would have to rest. So he leaves it essentially v'tzarich chiyun, whether you have to do hefker, or you have to relinquish and say this doesn't belong to me right now. So essentially, what we learn from here is that you should probably ask your renter not to do gardening work, or to mafkir your possession, your possession of the land. That's what's recommended in such a situation. Okay, now what about in a shared garden in an apartment building? Okay, here we have a garden here, part of an apartment building. Can anybody guess which apartment building this is in Ra'anana? If anybody guesses, you'll win a prize. Okay, now I'm reading to you from Pinei Halacha Rav Eliezer Melamed, who's a very big posek here in Eretz Yisrael. He says, whoever lives in a building whose majority of occupants insist that the gardener they employ will continue to work in the seventh as usual, they must express his protest. This, by the way, was translated by Google Translate. So if it sounds like it was translated by some Russian bot, you would understand why. Must express his protest and ask not to participate in the payment for it. Otherwise, he is a partner in all the forbidden works. And it is proper that he write his protest on the bulletin board. But he must make sure that the protest is worded carefully while maintaining the dignity of other tenants so as not to disturb the peace between them. This is a very practical issue. If you live in an apartment building and they're planning on working the land during Schnatashmita, you have to put a post up and say, listen, I'm paying varabait, but my portion of Adabait is not going to go towards gardening. Now, you may want to try to encourage others to join in this, and maybe you'll take a vote. And no one will do work in the garden and during Schnatashmita, or at least you'll just do things that are permitted. And if despite this, they oblige him to pay taxes as usual, he will pay as usual, but will politely inform them that the taxes he pays are intended solely for the electrical and cleaning needs of the building and not for the garden work. Okay, so this is this has to do with a bayit mishutaf, okay, or a house or an apartment building that is collectively owned. Now, what about public property? What about Ra'anana Ir HaKodesh? Okay, so first of all, here we see a picture of a chuzah here. Okay, you can see that many trees. It's very beautiful in this municipality of Ra'anana. I was hoping to put up a picture of Chaim Broida. I saw a fascinating picture of Chaim Broida with Aaron Ginobili watching the soccer game, but I didn't have a chance to put it onto the screen. You can check it out later. And basically, halacha is as follows: if the city is violating laws of Shemitah, you should write a letter to ask that the taxes you pay are not going towards gardening in the 7th year. I'm not quite sure what Ra'anana does, but I have noticed that they've been planting a lot over the last few days and weeks on main streets. And it would appear to me that they're trying to get a lot of their gardening work done now before Schnatashmita, which is a good thing. And Herbie here is rolling his head. It sounds like they're still going to do gardening work over during, but you'll see that some types of gardening work are permitted. Okay, let's go to the next question, which has to do with, I just can't see this at the top of my screen, but it's, sorry, let me just escape for a second. Okay, has to do with ilanei srak, non-fruit trees. Okay, so we're moving through the different questions that, now here we have some non-fruit trees. We have some giant sequoias in California, some beautiful, beautiful trees. If you've never seen the giant sequoias of California, definitely recommend. They're like 3,000 years old, these trees. Now, so we're talking about planting, okay? And essentially, you're not allowed to plant. Sorry, you know what? I want to go to one thing first before we get to that. I should have put this slide first here. Planting trees, okay? We've spoken about this notion that you're not allowed to plant seeds. Are you allowed to plant trees? Is nitiyah included in zri'ah? Zri'ah is planting seeds. Is nitiyah included in planting seeds? So let's look at the different explanations. First, we have Rash Mishans, which is a commentator to the Mishnah Shvi'it, one of the Ashkenazi Balei Tosfot, and he says as follows: Kol shekei nitiyah, of course, planting trees is prohibited during the 7th year. Dihi ikar melachat fei, kidemuchach b'Shabbat dezomer toladad dezoreya, kol shekei notea dedami lezoreya tfei. So he pulls a kavachomer. He says, wait a second. If pruning is prohibited in the Shemitah year, all the more so planting is going to be prohibited in the Shemitah year. According to Rash Mishans, you are violating a Torah prohibition if you plant a tree. So it means that Zriya, the prohibition of Zriya, includes planting, you want to plant nana, or if you want to plant, hadas, or if you want, sorry, hadas doesn't have, it's not something you're going to eat. But, if you want to, plant watermelons, or if you want to plant wheat, whatever you want to plant, now it includes trees. It's a Torah prohibition as well. In contrast, the Rambam says, Ein notein b'shvi'it afilu ilan srak. One is not allowed to plant shvi'it afilu ilan srak. I probably brought the wrong quote here, but for the Rambam, it's a rabbinic prohibition. So we have a machloka between Rishonim. Is it a Torah prohibition or a rabbinic prohibition to plant in the trees in the 7th year? We also have an interesting halacha. This is brought down in Masechet Gitin Daf Nun Gimel Amud Bet. If you plant in the 7th year a tree, you have to uproot the tree. You have to uproot it. And this is interesting because there's a difference between Shabbat. If you plant something on Shabbat, you have to uproot the tree. The answer is, we assume you don't have to. Okay, you do it inadvertently, you keep the tree. But during Schnatashmita, if you accidentally plant the tree in the 7th year, you would have to uproot it. Why are we so concerned about Shemitah even more so than Shabbat? So first of all, this would seem to prove that the prohibition is prohibited from the Torah, because otherwise we wouldn't be comparing Shabbat and Shemitah. But the answer is In some ways, Chazal, the rabbis, are more concerned about fulfillment of Shnatashmita than they are about Shabbat. Shabbat, everybody knows what's prohibited and permitted. Shnatashmita, a lot of people try to get around it. And therefore, in order to strengthen it, we dafka, you have to uproot anything that's grown. Now, there's an interesting point, like for the Rambam, why should there be a difference between seeding and planting? Why is one prohibited from the Torah, the other one's prohibited midrabanan? Like, very strange. So there's an explanation, the Maharikatz, Chadashot Kuf Ayin Vav, who says as follows: the Torah only forbids labor that will give benefit in the Shemitah year. If I plant a tree now, I'm only going to derive benefit from it in 5, 6, 7 years, who knows how long. But if I plant wheat, it will grow this year. If I plant nana, it will grow this year. So it's only things that you would derive benefit from directly in this year that are prohibited. Min ha-Torah, according to the Torah. But we paskin essentially that you're not allowed to plant any trees during Shemitah. So you can't plant seeds, you can't plant trees. Now, are you allowed to plant? Are you allowed to plant trees that do not have fruit in them? Okay, so let me just move this box down a little bit. Okay, so trees, non-fruit trees, which are called ilanei srak, are these prohibited or permitted to plant during the Shemitah year? You just have them for noi. Okay, noi means nun vav yud. This is just for beauty. So let's look at these sources. So question. The fundamental question is the prohibition of planting against working of the land during Shemitah, or is it about deriving benefit from the land? If I just plant a regular tree, I don't get any benefit from it. I plant a fruit tree, maybe I would get benefit, right? Plant something that gives fruit, I get benefit. But if I'm planting a non-fruit tree, is there any benefit from that? So we have a machloket here. We have, first of all, earlier sources in the Yerushalmi. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says it is permitted to plant non-fruit-bearing trees in the Shemitah year. Rashbag says this explicitly. Rav Shlomo Sirilo, who's a Sfaradi, he was born right before the expulsion from Spain in Sfarad. He says it only forbids planting fruit trees. Okay, one second. The Torah only forbids planting fruit trees. Only fruit trees are prohibited, non-fruit trees are permitted. But this is a machlokah with the Rambam, because the Rambam says, Ein notiin b'shvita afilu ilan srak. You may not plant trees, even trees that do not have fruit on them. Okay, you're not allowed to plant these things. So what we're seeing here, we're expanding what planting. Planting has to do with seeds. Planting has to do with trees. Planting now is also, we paskin, you also cannot plant non-fruit trees. Now, an interesting question that arises from this is, so, again, we said that fruit that grows in the 7th year has kedushat shvi'it. What about the branches of trees? Do they have kedushat shvi'it? Yes or no? So the Gemara in Masechet Sukkah says, "Ve'etzim ein bahem mishum kedushat shvi'it." It's explicitly, the branches do not have kedushat shvi'it. Okay, and they give an example here. Now, again, practical halacha related earlier, we found the Rambam planting trees is asur midrabanan. Trees do not have kedushat shvi'it. Now, there are two case studies that I want to share with you related to this issue. Number one, let's say you're constructing new roads. Okay, so they just constructed that new road by the Beit HaKvarot in Ra'anana, and they planted a lot of trees along there. Okay, so let's say you're doing a huge construction project, and you want to put down trees, and it's a big project, an intercity project or a big project. Are you allowed to plant trees in the Shemitah year for something like this? So, very interesting psak of Eliezer Malamed. It says, if the work cannot get done before Shemitah, sometimes you don't want to hold up a public works project. It's a big burden, it costs a lot of money, and it's a big burden to continue the work after Shemitah. Then a non-Jew can plant the trees. You can have non-Jews planting the trees. The logic, as far as shvut b'makom tzorech, again, Shemitah is only midrabanan. Planting trees is only midrabanan, especially non-fruit trees. And b'makom tzorech, to save money because of it's going to cause traffic if you have to close the road again. Okay, so that's one case study related to planting non-fruit trees. Study number 2 is, can you cut branches for dalad minim and for schach? Now, Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, okay, basically paskins that even a lulav is something that we sort of throw away after Sukkot is over. and there it's not something that it's not food, so it doesn't have kedushat shvi'it, and it's not even ma'achal behema. And so he suggests something that we throw away without even thinking about it, which we sort of do with a lulav. He suggests does not have kedushat shvi'it. Okay, so so it's an example of a branch from a tree that does not have kedushat shvi'it, and this is a topic that we'll pick up furthermore. And by the way, also by extension, cutting schach is not a problem because the branches do not have kedushat shvi'it. Okay, let's move on. So we've discussed planting trees. We've discussed non-Jews working the land. We've discussed seeding. We've discussed non-fruit trees. We've discussed our responsibility in public, in the city, by Mishutaf. We've gone through a lot of our different questions. Okay, well, we're going to do a little bit more tonight, and then we're going to call it the night. Now, what about plowing? Okay, plowing was not one of the prohibitions that we saw explicitly mentioned in the Torah. However, Rabbi Akiva is quoted in the Mishnah in Masachet Shvi'it, okay, saying as follows. He says, it says, Becharish uvekatzir tishbot. This is a pasuk related to Shabbat, seventh day. You have to rest from plowing and from harvesting. Now, Ein tzarech lamar charish v'katzir shel shvita v'charish shel erev shvi'it shunichnas b'shvit. Rabbi Akiva darshans this to mean, this is not about Shabbat. We know Shabbat you can't plow and you can't harvest. It's one of the 39 melachot, two of the 39 melachot. So this pasuk, we're going to pick it up and we're going to drop it by the laws of Shemitah. And where do we drop it by Shemitah? We drop it by this notion that there's Tosefet Shemitah, that there's things that you can't do even before the Shemitah year starts. And we're going to get there in just a second when we talk about Tosefet Shemitah. But the point is, what do we learn from here by Rabbi Akiva? Shemitah, you're not allowed to plow right before Shemitah starts. Certainly you can't plow during Shemitah itself. But this is another one of the things that you cannot do in your field during Shemitah year. You cannot plant anything, and you cannot plow, you cannot dig, you cannot do any hoeing, any of these things. The Rambam codifies this in Parak Aleph Halacha Aleph. Okay, there's an interesting point that the Rambam says. He says if you dig holes and you do all these things, you only chayav makat mardut midivrehen. You only chayav midrabanan, not midoraita, which raises an interesting question: why it's only midrabanan, the punishment, and not midoraita? Okay, the Chazon Ish and others address this question. I'm not going to get into it right now, but this is in general, plowing is also prohibited in the Shemitah year in your garden. So you can't just go through your garden and start digging holes and all that stuff. We don't do that in the seventh year. Okay, when does the Shemitah year really start? Okay, and here we have a picture of Joe Biden looking at his watch. He wants to, what time is it? When does the Shemitah year really start? So technically, Rosh Hashanah, Aleph Tishrei. However, we have a principle called Tosefet Shvi'it. And just like we have Tosefet Shabbat, we add on time to Shabbat, we light candles earlier. We have Tosefet Yom Kippur, we start the fast earlier. We also have Tosefet Shvi'it. We add on to the Shemitah year. The idea is that we bring from the Kedusha of the seventh year, we want it to flow out, to bleed out before the year and after the year. And we see this brought up in Masachet Rosh Hashanah, Daf Ten Amud Aleph, the Tanya Becharish of Katzir Tishbot, Rabbi Akiva Omer. Oh, this is the same Gemara that I just quoted to you in Masachet Shvit. Becharish of Katzir Tishbot, Rabbi Akiva Omer, Eino tzarech lomar Becharish of Katzir Shvit, Sharei Kvar Ne'amar, Tzad Chalot Tizra, El Charish Shel Erev Shvit, Hanichnas Shvit. This is the notion of Tosefet Shvit, and this is where things get very practical, and we have some deadlines coming up very soon. Now, does Tosefet Shvit still apply today? The answer is yes and no. We're going to look at the Rambam, Hilchot Shemitah, Perek Gimel Halacha Aleph and Tet. And we're going to see the Rambam is going to codify this issue. It is a halacha conveyed to Moses at Sinai that is forbidden to work the land in the last 30 days of the sixth year. So 30 days of the sixth year, remember, what's the month? We're now in Av. Soon it's going to be Elul and Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is about 54 days away. Now, just before the sabbatical year, because one is preparing for the sabbatical year. So you can't, it's a tradition passed down from Moshe that you may not work the land the month before Shemitah, starting from Aleph Elul. This concept, the prohibition to work the land established by tradition, applies in the era of the temple alone. Our sages extended that prohibition, decreeing that one should not plow an orchard in the year preceding the sabbatical year, in the year of the temple after Shavuot, nor a field of grain after Pesach. In the year where the temple does not stand, we are permitted to perform agricultural work until Rosh Hashanah is permitted by scriptural law. What the Rambam is saying is that we are allowed to do work in the field until Aleph Tishrei, until Rosh Hashanah. However, there's a catch here. Planting is going to be different. All the above applies in the year of the temple, as we started. In the present year, by contrast, we are permitted to work the land until Rosh Hashanah. Moreover, even in the year of the temple, it is permitted to remove stones from the fields and fertilize them, and to hoe in zucchini and squash gardens and partial land until Rosh Hashanah. Similarly, one may fertilize saplings, remove dried leaves and branches. You could do all these things. Okay, all these tasks are permitted in the year preceding the sabbatical year until Rosh Hashanah, the sabbatical year, even in the year of the temple. Again, you could work the land, no problem, until Aleph Tishrei, but can you still plant trees? And we're going to see the answer is no. And the cutoff date is very significant. Rashi says you may not plant trees 30 days before Shemitah. Why? Shloshim u'shloshim bai, shloshim yom l'klita shtein nishreshet ba'aretz. This is an interesting issue. If I plant within 30 days of Shemitah, the trees are going to take root during the Shemitah year. And the assumption in Rashi here is that not only am I not allowed to work the land, I can't cause there to be new rooting during the Shemitah year. Okay, the Rambam has a different explanation for Tosefet Shvi'it, for the addition of the to the seventh year, and this is an issue of marit ayin, of perspective, appearance. Okay, and we're reading now from the Rambam, Halacha Perek Gimel Yud Aleph. Even in the present age, we may not plant trees, graft trees, or extend vines in the 6th year, unless there is time for the planting to become rooted and remain after taking root 30 days before Rosh Hashanah, the sabbatical year. Usually, it takes 2 weeks for a plant to take root. Wow, so this is interesting. So there's a month that you can't work the land from Aleph Elul, that you can't plant anything, but you also need to extend it 2 more weeks. So now we're talking about 44 days before Shemitah, you're not allowed to plant. What is 44 days before Shemitah? Anybody know what is that date? Anybody? 44 days before Shemitah is Tet Vav Be'av, Tu Be'av. You may work on Tu Be'av, but not after Tu Be'av. You may not plant after Tu Be'av. This is forbidden at all times, even when there's no temple, because of the impression that might be created, lest an observer think that they were planted in the sabbatical year. If you plant within 44 days of Shemitah, from Tet Vav to Aleph Tishrei, someone might think, wait a second, did that guy plant in the Shemitah year? Marit ayin, and it will look like you're violating a prohibition. Thus, if a person planted or grafted or extended a tree vine in the 6th year, 44 days before Shemitah, he's allowed to maintain it. If he did so for a lesser time, he must uproot it. What's the meaning of this explanation? Rabbi Akiva Eiger explains in the Rambam, explains the basis for such a supposition. If the tree is not planted before 40 days preceding the new year, we count the beginning of its Orla years from Rosh Hashanah. Thus, it will be considered a lachdi as if the tree was planted in the sabbatical year. So there's an issue of Orla. I don't want to get too detailed into this. It's a little bit late now, but Orla is, you have to count until the 5th year when you're allowed to enjoy the produce of a tree. This comes from Parshat Kedoshim. How do you count the years? What's the cutoff date? So the cutoff date is Aleph Tishrei. But the tree needs to have been planted 30 days before Rosh Hashanah in order to count in the year before. Let's say I plant something the day before Rosh Hashanah, it doesn't count. You only count the next year. Okay, so if I plant something in now, which is over 50 days before Rosh Hashanah, this year will count as Rosh Hashanah. I'll give you an example. Our son Boaz was born Baruch Hashem on December 30th. We were able, in terms of taxes that year, the whole year counted as if we had another child in that year, and we got a tax deduction because we had another child, even though he was born at the end of the year. But all that you need is to get in one day of the year to count as if the same thing is with Orla, but you need 30 days for Orla, and you need 2 weeks for it to take root, so you get to 44 days. Now, halacha l'maaseh, and it gets a little bit complicated because there are different types of produce, and I'm drawing here from Torah Land, which I told you is an excellent website. First of all, in terms of planting, prepare. It is recommended to plant various plants in the garden during the spring of the 6th year so they will properly take root. This ensures that if they take root, one will not need to take care of them during Shemitah. They do not, there will be time to replace them prior. Number 2, grass.
Turf should be laid several weeks before the onset of Shemitah, at least a month. But the grass will properly take root, and it will be possible to mow at least once before the onset of grass seed should be sown in the spring, and watered well, so it will be possible to mow the lawn before Shemitah. You want to be able to mow the lawn before Shemitah, so that, because when you mow, you cause to grow, and you're not allowed to cause to grow for the sake of growth. You cause to grow for the sake of appearances, for beauty. Now there's a detail here which you need to be aware. Fruit trees in a clod of soil. When you buy something from a nursery, usually there's a tree surrounding by dirt. This should be planted before the 29th of Av. Yet it is recommended to plant them by the 15th of Av should the clod of soil crumble. That's in another few days. The 15th of Av is when you should plant fruit trees. Non-fruit trees, if you want to plant, may be planted up to the 29th of Elul before the Shemitah year. It is recommended to plant them by the 15th of Elul, however, should the clod of soil crumble. Again, it needs to take root for 2 weeks. Next list, what about planting flowers and vegetables? If there's no soil, you have until the 26th of Elul. It takes 3 days for these things, 4 days for these things to take root. If it's with soil, you could plant it right up until Rosh Hashanah, okay? Rav Rimon mentioned in his book, it is recommended to plant perennial flowers in anticipation of the Shemitah year. Okay, here we have some pictures of perennial flowers. What is a perennial plant? Perennial plant, or simply perennial, is a plant that lives more than 2 years. The term is often used to differentiate plant from shorter-lived annuals and biennials. So by planting perennials, they will grow on their own when the spring comes, and you won't need to plant new things. Okay, we're going to stop here. Next week, Ezrat Hashem, we're going to talk about atzitzim, flower pots, and chamamot, and all of these things. Now, I'm officiating at a cousin's wedding next Wednesday night. So it's a good chance that we'll either do Monday night or Tuesday night. Okay, I will send out a message, or maybe even Thursday night, I will send out a message about this, or maybe we'll just do it the week afterwards. But the next topic, again, is going to be about flower pots and hothouses, and maintaining the garden, weeding, fertilizing, watering, cutting branches back, debugging your garden, all of these things. Maintenance of the garden will be, Bezrat Hashem, the next topic. So we got through a lot tonight. I'm going to stop the recording right now. And for anybody who has questions now, feel free to raise questions or to raise any comments or thoughts. So Yishar Koach on the learning tonight. This is recorded. I will send this out with the presentation. And in the meantime, wishing you everybody Erev Tov.